Rain dripped from her hair as she handed a stranger her last crumpled dollar. He looked up, eyes hungry yet steady, and whispered, "Why would you help me?" Savannah never imagined that single choice would rewrite both their lives forever. Rain hung over Portland like a grey curtain when Savannah Hayes found a wrinkled dollar sleeping alone in her wallet. One bill, soft as a leaf. Rent was already late. Her phone would die tomorrow when the service cut out. She'd been living on coffee from the staff pot and the kind of ramen you buy in bricks. Still, the dollar felt warm in her palm, as if it remembered better days. She tucked it back and kept walking along the park path, her thrift store wrap dress clinging where the damp air found her curves. Savannah was built like the women in old paintings, thick, generous, impossible to ignore even when she tried. She pulled her jacket tighter. Across the street, Magpie Diner glowed with neon and the smell of grease and cinnamon. She should go in, trade the dollar for a muffin and pretend it counted as a meal. Instead, she noticed him. He sat on a bench near the map board, tall and lean, early 30s maybe, with kind eyes and a jaw that hadn't seen a barber in a while. His clothes were clean but thinned by time. A faded backpack slouched beside him like a dog waiting for a command. He was reading a battered business book with the corners curled up, lips moving a little like he wanted the ideas to land someplace steady. Most people glanced and looked away. Savannah stopped. The dollar burned hotter. "Hey," she said, trying to sound casual and not like a woman about to do something reckless with her last bit of luck. "I'm headed into Magpie. Could I bring you something?" He looked up, surprise flashing before caution settled in. "That's kind of you," he said, voice low and careful. "But I'm okay." "You're reading about profit margins with a stomach that's arguing with you," she said, gentler than her words. "I'm a waitress. I've learned to hear that sound across a room." A wry smile tugged at him. "You heard mine from 20 feet. 25, she said. "I've got good ears." He closed the book around a scrap of receipt. "I don't want to take from you. What if I need to give?" She took the dollar out, held it up between two fingers like a green flag. "This is all I have until Thursday. I'm not pretending otherwise. But Magpie will let me stretch it if I ask. They know me. Then you shouldn't spend it on me. Maybe the word is with," she countered. "Not on. We'll share something." He studied her, really looked. Past the bright lipstick she wore like armor, past the hourglass dress and tired eyes, to the stubborn spark underneath. She was beautiful, the kind that didn't apologize, but there was more, and he recognized it because he used to carry the same flame. "What's your name?" he asked. "Savannah." "Elijah," he said. "Elijah Walker." "Okay, Elijah Walker," she said, braver now that the script was writing itself. "Soup and a grilled cheese, split right down the middle?" He hesitated, pride wrestling with hunger, pride lost by a thin margin. "All right," he said, "but only if I pay you back as soon as I can." "You can pay me back by telling me if serendipity is 10 letters or 11, she said, nodding toward the newspaper folded under his book. "The crossword's been roasting me all week." He laughed, and the sound made the wet air feel warmer. 11, he said, "and I'll take the soup." Inside Magpie, the bell over the door chimed. The diner was all chrome edges and laminated menus, the kind of place that kept coffee hot and secrets looser than they should be. Savannah waved to the counter. "Savvy," called Janine from behind the register. "You off shift?" "On in an hour. Can we do a split special? Bowl of tomato, 1 grilled, 2 cups of coffee?" Janine took one look at Elijah, another at the lonely dollar, and slid the order slip into the window. "You'll bus 3 extra tables," she said, pretending not to be kind. "I'll bus 4, Savannah said. They took a booth by the window. Elijah set the book down, the spine flayed open, and rested his hands on the formica like he wasn't sure he deserved the seat. "So," she said, wrapping her hands around the empty mug as if it already held heat. "What's the book?" "Post-mortems," he said. "Business autopsies. How companies fail and why." "That cheerful, huh?" "I used to run one," he said. A company, not an autopsy." "What happened?" He watched the rain smear the street into watercolor. "Wrong investors, right product at the wrong speed. I tried to make the numbers smile for people who only smiled at numbers. Then one bad month became 3. The rest unraveled fast." "Is that why you're on this bench?" "That's why I'm between addresses," he said, a wincing joke. I have interviews, but applications ask for things I don't have at the moment. Landlords like steady. I'm learning to be patient. The coffee's arrived, then the soup and sandwich, and if Grace has a smell, it might be butter on bread and tomatoes gone molten in a pot. Savannah slid him the larger half without drawing attention to the trade. "Your turn," he said after a sip, warmth creeping into his face. "What's your autopsy?" She lifted one shoulder. "Art school dropout with a good wrist and bad timing. My mom got sick. I came home. After that there was rent, an avalanche of little bills and a stack of canvases smiling at me from the corner like guilty dogs. I paint nights, I waitress days, and I pretend I don't mind choosing between bus fare and brushes." He looked at her hands. The faint constellation of paint that never fully washed out had settled into her cuticles, blues and ochres clinging like promises. "What do you paint?" "Faces," she said, without apology. "The truth inside the pose." "That sounds like a mission statement." "It's how I survive." She tore the sandwich neatly and pushed his half closer. "Eat before you philosophize." They ate. For a while the only sounds were silverware and steady rain and the low hum of the diner radio, a woman singing about miracles as if she'd seen one happen on a Tuesday. Elijah leaned back when they were done, eyes half closed like his bones had remembered being full. "Thank you," he said, 2 words, deliberate. "I don't know how to be grateful without sounding like a speech." "Don't be a speech," Savannah said. "Be here." He nodded. "I'm here." She pulled the crossword from her bag, chewed the end of the pen. 7 letters, a gift you don't deserve but get anyway. "Mercy," he said, then frowned. "No, that's 5. "Blessing?" 8. "Grace," they said together, and the pen slid the G into the grid as if the square had been waiting for it. Rain thickened against the glass. Savannah glanced at the storm, then at the clock, then at Elijah's backpack that had soaked through along the bottom. "Do you have somewhere inside to go tonight?" she asked. "There's a shelter that might have space," he said, "if I get there early." "You can't line up while reading post-mortems." "I've tried." She took a breath. It felt like stepping out over a ledge and hoping the ground would meet her. "I'm on shift until 9. I live 3 blocks away. I have a couch. It's lumpy and stubborn, but drier than a bench. One night if you want it." His eyes widened. "Savannah, you don't know me." "I know the look of someone holding on by their teeth," she said. "I know you used your first real warmth to make sure I had half the sandwich. I know your book has a library stamp from a branch across town, which means you walked to borrow hope, and I know I can trust my instincts." He swallowed. "People will tell you that's dangerous. People will tell you a lot of things. My rent's late. I still paint. My phone's about to die. I still call my mom's old number sometimes just to hear her voice on the voicemail we never cancelled. Dangerous isn't the right word. Necessary is." He looked down at the dollar she'd used to start the meal. Janine had pushed it back under the receipt with a wink, and then back at her. Something unclenched in his face. "Okay," he said quietly. "One night. I'll take the couch, and I'll bus those 4 tables with you." "You'll bus 5, she returned, smiling despite the tremor in her belly. When the bill came, Janine tapped the paper. "Special today, pay what you can for artists and saints," she said, eyes soft. "You two look like a collaboration." Outside, the rain shifted from steady to sudden. Savannah slid out of the booth, gathered her bag and his book like they were equally important, and reached for the backpack before he could. "Ready?" she asked. He nodded, stood, and for a strange, perfect second, they were side by side in the doorway, while the bell above them chimed a small, bright note. The storm breathed in. The street went silver, and Savannah thought, wildly, that some doors opened to more than weather. "Savannah," Elijah said as they stepped into the rain, "I owe you." "Not yet," she said, lifting her jacket over both their heads as they ran. "But let's see what we can build out of $1." They sprinted the 3 blocks under her jacket, 2 silhouettes stitched together by a storm. By the time Savannah wrestled the lock and shouldered the door open, both were laughing in that breathless way people do when the alternative is shivering. Her apartment was no bigger than a train car, 1 room with a stubborn radiator, a kitchenette, a bathroom that had to choose between towels or a door swing, but the walls turned it into a chapel. Paintings everywhere. Faces on canvas and cardboard and paper taped above baseboards, Faces on wood panels leaned against a bookshelf, faces crowding the window ledge like they were waiting to be named. Elijah stopped on the threshold, rain dripping from his hair, eyes going wide. "Savannah," he said, soft as a prayer, "you live inside your work." "I live inside what I can afford," she said, kicking her boots off, "and I refuse to let rent bully the art out." She tossed him a towel and another at her own hair, aware of how the damp dress clung to the sweep of her hips. She was a thick woman in a thin apartment, curves asking for space where there wasn't much to give. He was careful with his gaze, curious, never greedy. It made something in her unclench. "Couch is over there, being 3 feet from everywhere else." She tugged a knitted throw off the back and shook out a puff of dust. "It's dramatic, likes to groan." "I've slept on concrete," he said, setting his pack down. "Anything that argues back is an upgrade." She put water on, then coffee, because ritual steadied her hands. He walked the perimeter, pausing at a portrait of an elderly man feeding pigeons, at a girl in a yellow coat with a defiant chin, at 2 wrinkled hands holding a seedling. He leaned in, tracing brushstrokes with his eyes. "You catch the moment people stop pretending," he said. "That's when their faces get interesting," she answered, and only realized the intimacy of it after the words hung in air. Steam fogged the small window. The kettle whistled. She poured honey into 2 chipped mugs and pressed one into his hands. "Thank you," he said, the same deliberate way he'd said it in the diner, like a promise, not a line. She wanted to fill silence with chatter, about rain, about the crossword, about anything, but the quiet felt earned. So she let it stretch as he stood before a self-portrait she'd done at 3 a.m. on a night when debt felt like a rising tide. She'd painted herself too brightly on purpose. Bold mouth, tired eyes, a body that refused to apologize for taking up space. He looked from the canvas to her and back as if checking for a trick. "You painted your fear and then stared it down," he said. "I painted my face," she countered, but her throat warmed. The radiator thunked awake. He set his mug on the sill. "May I ask something practical?" "Please do." "How much are you charging for these?" She barked a laugh. "Wrong question. Try how little," he nodded, as if confirming a diagnosis. "You price to be polite." "I price to eat," she said, heat climbing now for a different reason. "And then people assume your work is worth what you can afford to ask," he said gently. "I've done a different version of the same thing, whilst sold strategy for less than it cost to deliver it. You teach people how to treat your value." She took a breath. Pride again, wrestling with reality. "It's hard to put a number on a face that talked to me for 10 hours. "Then don't," he said. "Put a number on what you bring to the room, on the years it took to see what other people miss, on the way someone will stand in front of this," he gestured to the elderly man and his pigeons, "and remember to call their grandfather." Her eyes stung. "You talk like a proposal." "I talk like someone who's failed enough to know the difference between cheap and priceless," he said. "May I sit?" "Please," she said, and they landed on opposite edges of the groaning couch, knees nearly touching because geometry insisted. He pulled the battered business book from his pack and flattened a blank flyleaf. "Okay, no speeches, just a napkin plan. Step 1, pick 5 pieces you're proudest of." He clicked the pen she handed him. "Step 2, we write 5 emails that don't ask for permission. We tell 5 places, in town and online, what your work does to human beings. Step 3, we set a floor price that scares you a little. Step 4, we build a simple site, 1 page to start, images, a story, a way to contact you." She stared. "You make it sound simple." "It is not simple," he said. "It's clear. Clear is a gift." She found herself nodding. The room seemed to get bigger around the edges, the way rooms do when you suddenly see how to rearrange them. "And what do you get?" she asked, half teasing, half testing. "Because this sounds like strategy I couldn't afford even if I ate only toast." "I get to put your address on my applications," he said. It came out fast, then slower. "If that's too much, say no. I'll understand." She blinked. "That's it. That's not nothing," he said, mouth quirking. "It's borrowed stability. I'll contribute when I can. Groceries, bus passes, whatever we decide. If the idea makes you feel unsafe, it dies here. No questions." Savannah looked at the painting of the girl in the yellow coat, the one whose chin dared the world to argue, and then at the man in front of her who'd offered terms without a trace of pity. He'd carried his dignity into her apartment like a third person, uninvited but welcome. "I think my instincts brought me this far," she said. "They haven't killed me yet. Yes, use my address. We'll tell them you're subletting the couch." He exhaled, the kind of breath that empties months of tightness. "I'll make it worth the trouble." "You already did," she said. "You called my work priceless in a sentence that didn't make me roll my eyes." He grinned for real then, and it changed his whole face. She noticed a faint scar near his jawline, the sort that tells a story if you ask, but she didn't ask. Not yet. They worked until the coffee cooled and the radiator threw off the damp. He jotted bullets and drew boxes. She paced, pointed, argued with herself aloud. The storm clicked its nails against the glass and then wandered off to bully some other block. When her pen ran dry, he shook his and kept going, as if momentum itself was fuel. At some point her stomach complained, loud enough to make them both laugh. He stood. "Your kitchen?" he asked, already halfway to it. "Left cabinet, top shelf. Rice I forgot I had," she said. "Fridge, 1 egg, suspicious spinach, half an onion, and a heroic heel of cheddar." He lifted the onion like a treasure. "I can work with that." She watched him move in the tiny kitchen. Competent, economical, a chef of scarcity. He made a pan sizzle, coaxed the spinach back from the edge of regret, turned rice and scraps into a meal that tasted like a small victory. When he slid a bowl into her hands, there was nothing performative about it. Gratitude went both ways across the table. "Tell me something true," he said while they ate. "My mother kept a box of postcards by her bed," Savannah said. "When she was too tired for visitors, she'd read other people's weather. She said it kept her alive to remember the world was bigger than her room." He looked at the self-portrait again. "You paint to make big rooms for other people." She swallowed. "Your turn." "I thought success meant speed," he said. "Now I think it means staying. Staying with the hard thing long enough to make it honest." The radiator sighed like it agreed. Outside, car tires whispered on wet pavement. Inside, the couch decided to be generous and didn't groan when both of them leaned back. "We should sleep," she said at last, surprised by how easily the word we fit in her mouth. "I'll be gone before your shift," he said. "I'll line up at the shelter, then hit the library when it opens. Could you text me if there's any mail?" "My phone's on a diet," she said. "It loses service whenever it feels dramatic. But yes, we'll make a plan." He made his bed on the couch with the reverence of a guest who'd been refused too often. She left him an extra pillow, the good one. When she turned off the lamp, the apartment went blue from the streetlight, and her paintings looked like they were listening. In the half-dark, he said, "Savannah? Serendipity is 11, but grace is 5. She smiled into her blanket. "Grace is also a yes." He was quiet a long time. "Then, thank you for the yes." Morning found them in a narrow ribbon of sun. Elijah was already up, the sink clean, 2 mugs set like parentheses around a piece of paper he'd left on the counter. His handwriting was steady. "Savannah, shelter line called earlier than I expected. Thank you for the roof and the kindness. I'll be back by noon to help you send the first email, if you still want the help. EPS, put 3 red dots on the canvases you never underprice again. Start there." She looked where he meant. 3 little stickers faced her like dare and blessing. The old man with pigeons, the yellow-coated girl, the 2 wrinkled hands holding a seedling. Savannah stared a long time, the kettle beginning to murmur behind her, and felt the world tilt, not a collapse but a click, as if a door inside the day had opened to a hallway she hadn't known was there. She reached for the pen, wrote the first subject line with a shaking grin, and didn't apologize for asking the number that scared her a little. By noon, the apartment smelled like cheap coffee and rain steam, and Savannah had already written 3 emails she'd never have dared to send yesterday. Subject lines that didn't beg, sentences that didn't apologize, images attached with file names that read like small manifestos instead of IMG 4027 final. The floor price made her stomach tilt, which Elijah had called a good sign. He kept his word and came back on time with a grocery bag and a stack of library printouts. The bag held day-old baguette, eggs, and oranges. The printouts were a resume he'd rebuilt from memory in the computer lab and a single-page mock-up for her site he'd sketched in black pen, boxes for images, and a paragraph for the artist statement. On the bottom right corner, he'd lettered a price list in his steady hand. Seeing her numbers in ink made them look like they belonged to a person who believed. "You were serious about noon," she said, half impressed, half relieved. "I didn't want momentum to have time to doubt itself," he said, setting the bread on the counter like it had been rescued from a flood. They stood by the window where the light was kind and their shadows didn't argue. He angled canvases toward the pale sun, took photos with her cracked phone, wiped the lens on his shirt, took them again. He cleared space on the table for the laptop that only liked outlets and tethered it to his own phone for a handful of minutes he could spare. Piece by piece, they assembled a single-page site on a free domain with a name that felt like claiming Savannah Hayes Portraiture. What if the domain is available because no one wants it? She said. "That's like saying your seat is empty because no one thinks you deserve to sit," he answered. "Take the chair." He typed while she paced. He read sentences aloud and she cut the ones that sounded too pretty and kept the ones that sounded like breath. At the bottom he added, "Commissions open for 2. She picked the number. It was larger than she'd said out loud to any living human being. He didn't flinch. At 2 she had to run to Magpie for her shift. Janine looked her up and down like a sergeant measuring troops and slid her a hair tie. "You're late to yourself, not to me," she said. "Bust the window seats first. The mother with twins at table 4 wanted warm-up. She left you a napkin at the host stand." Savannah grabbed the napkin. In block letters, "Your blue-faced woman made me cry. Do you sell these?" A number was scrawled underneath and the patient curve of a name, Nora. Her heart did a small flip and then got back to work. In the lull between the lunch crowd and the after-school stampede, Elijah appeared at the counter with flour on his shirt and a line of sun across his cheekbone like somebody had underlined his face. He held up 2 fingers. Janine poured 2 coffees without asking and slid a plate of fries between them like a treaty. "How many emails?" he asked. 5, she said. "And a napkin." He read Nora's note and grinned. "We're officially multi-channel," he said, scribbling "follow up" on the corner of a receipt. "Updates on your end." "Updates on your end." She counted because the game worked better when it was fair. He took a breath. 2 callbacks. One for a non-profit marketing coordinator, one for a community outreach role. They both asked for a local address. I gave them yours. I said I'm subletting your couch. "That is a very accurate sentence," she said, dizzy and delighted. "Did they sound weird about it?" "They sounded like people who have forms to fill and problems to solve," he said. "They cared that I could start next week if asked." She wanted to reach across the counter and squeeze his hand, and the impulse felt so natural she pretended she was smoothing the receipt instead. The bell over the door chimed. She refilled coffee and refolded hope into practical shapes. At 4, the landlord knocked at her apartment. He was polite the way people are when their politeness could turn into paperwork. Elijah let him in and listened as the man quoted late fees and shrugged about policies as if the rules had been made by weather. Elijah didn't argue. He asked for 2 weeks. The landlord, surprised by the steadiness in his voice, gave him 10 days and left a carbon copy that smelled like ink and old dread. When Savannah came home between shifts to change her shoes, Elijah held out the notice without commentary. She read it, felt the little panic bird wake and flutter in her chest and waited for it to settle. "I'll get day work this week," he said. "Deliveries, kitchen prep, whatever shows up on the board. I'll bring back rent, not flowers." "You don't owe," she began, then stopped herself. He had said once that gratitude wasn't a speech, it was being here. The same applied to contribution. "Okay," she said softly. "We triage. I'll ask Janine for an extra morning shift. We'll eat baguette and eggs and the oranges you rescued and call it cuisine." He looked at her like she'd lowered a rope into a well and waited. "Also," she added, almost defiant, "I'm not lowering the prices we chose just because panic has a megaphone." "That," he said, "is a strategy." In the blue hour between day and night, her phone, which had been sulking under the bed charger like a cat, vibrated 10 times at once. The service had returned long enough to deliver a small avalanche, 2 rejections wrapped in careful language, 1 circle back in full, 1 can you send more work, and 1 message from an address that made her sit down on the floor. From inquiries@brooksandfinchgallery.com, Subject studio visit. She read the email aloud. A curator named Lila had seen the images, responded to the faces, asked if Savannah had time this week for a visit to her studio. My studio is a couch, Savannah said, stunned into laughter, with a radiator that argues and a sink that sings when it feels like it. Then she'll meet your truth, Elijah said, too calm to be anything but brave. Say yes. We'll stage the room like a small museum and call the radiator a percussion section. She typed yes before the part of her brain that wanted to apologize found its keys. Lila replied within minutes, Wednesday at 10, 2 days. They went to war against clutter. They hung the 3 red-dotted pieces at eye level and taped paper labels under them with a price that made the room feel taller. Elijah borrowed a step stool from the neighbor who pretended he didn't notice the couch. He polished the frames with a T-shirt and arranged a line of chairs along the wall that didn't wobble much. Savannah edited her stack of work down to 20 pieces, and then to 12, and then to 8, that made a story when you walked past them. They printed the one sheet Elijah designed, her statement, his layout, and placed a neat stack on the table beside the loaf of day-old bread that became, under a wet towel and a hot oven, something that smelled like generosity. At midnight, they practiced. Elijah sat in the visitor chair with a pen and asked questions while Savannah answered without apologizing for breathing. He timed her when she got lost in describing brushwork. He tapped the price with the back of the pen when her voice did that tiny shrinking thing around numbers. He didn't correct. He redirected. She didn't blush. She reset. At 1, they stopped talking and watched the city through the window like it was a movie about belief. Tell me something you're afraid to say tomorrow, he said. That I'm ready, she said. That my work belongs. You are, he said, as if naming a colour. It does. She didn't sleep so much as hover. Dreamed she was hanging her heart on a nail and calling it a portrait. Woke at 6 to the sound of someone making the coffee polite and the eggs decide to be excellent again. Elijah set a plate in front of her and didn't ask if she could eat. He let the smell answer. At 9:30, she stood in the mirror and chose a dress that honoured her body and her work, not the parts of the world that wished both smaller. She tied her hair back to keep it out of the way of her sight. She put on lipstick like armour and left the fear on the sink where it couldn't stain anything important. Elijah looked up from the table where he'd lined 3 pens and a notepad at right angles like a ritual. He didn't wolf whistle or crack a joke. He said simply, You look like the person who painted these. You look like the person who convinced her to ask the right price, she said, tugging down the hem and tugging up her courage. At 9:58, the buzzer went off like a heartbeat finding a drum. Savannah pressed the button and heard footsteps on the stairs, a murmur of voices, a polite laugh that sounded like someone who made decisions for a living. She looked at Elijah. He nodded once, steady as a lighthouse. Savannah Hayes? Called a warm alto from the hallway. Savannah opened the door to a woman with sharp eyes and rain freckles on her cheeks. A portfolio tucked under one arm, a camera over her shoulder. Behind her, a younger assistant balanced a leather notebook and a sense of urgency. Lila Finch, the woman said, offering a hand. Thank you for having us. Thank you for coming, Savannah replied, stepping back to let them in as the radiator chose that exact moment to sigh like an old singer finding the note. Lila stepped in like someone used to walking into rooms that would soon be larger for having met her. Rain freckles glittered along her cheekbones. Her assistant, Maya, bright-eyed, brisk, clicked a pen as if minutes were coins. This is intimate, Lila said, taking in the chapel of canvases, the radiator sighing, the bread smell warming the air. It's my studio, Savannah replied, pulse loud but steady. It happens to be where I sleep. Lila smiled. Some of the best ones are. They began at the old man with pigeons. Lila moved close, then farther. She didn't shotgun compliments. She asked quiet questions that made the work open like a hand. Where did you meet him? The park. How long did he sit? 3 mornings. He wanted to tell stories about his wife. Do you paint from photos? Sketches. Memory. The moments when the face tells the truth and the pose drops. Maya took notes like wind. Pigeons, park, 3 mornings, story. At the girl in the yellow coat, Lila rocked on her heels. Every line points toward the chin. Defiance without performance. You're not trading in sorrow porn. You're building dignity. Savannah blinked. That's what I'm trying to do. I can tell. They paused at the two wrinkled hands holding a seedling. Lila glanced at the price sticker, then at Savannah. Is this retail? It is, Savannah said, resisting the instinct to lower a number with her next breath. Elijah stood by the table, silent lighthouse. Lila's mouth curved. Good. Keep it. We'll talk split later. At the self-portrait, the bold mouth, the tired eyes, the body that didn't apologize, Lila exhaled through her nose in a way that felt like the opposite of a sigh. This one makes people shut up, she said. That's rarer than you think. It made me shut up, Savannah confessed. Then it's working. They did the loop again, slower. Savannah told the truth instead of the myth. She was waiting tables between portraits. She priced too low for too long. She built this site last night. She wanted to stand in rooms where the work wasn't treated like hobby. Lila didn't flinch. When they sat, she folded her hands and leaned forward just slightly, as if preparing to offer a bridge. We have a group show next month, she said. Portraits of place, 8 emerging artists, 2 anchor names. I'd like to feature your pigeons, your yellow coat, your hands, and the self-portrait if you can bear to loan it. Opens 3 weeks from Friday. There's a stipend for framing. We work on a standard split, 50-50. We set retail together. We bring collectors in early. Savannah's heart tripped and caught itself. 3 weeks? You can do it, Lila said, not a dare but a known fact. Your work is ready. Don't let the size of the room trick you into thinking the work is small. Maya slid a slim folder from her bag. Consignment agreement. Nothing weird. We'll inventory once you decide. Elijah hadn't moved closer, but he seemed to radiate steadiness through the floorboards. Savannah felt it gather in her calves, her belly, her mouth. I'd like that, she said, and heard how her voice didn't trim itself for comfort. I want to keep the listed retail as a floor. Lila didn't hesitate. Good, she said. We can go up if the room wants it. They talked logistics, frames that didn't fight, wire and hardware, the way the wall label would read. Lila wrote down the website and without blinking, the number beside Commissions Open. She closed the folder, then touched a corner of the self-portrait lightly, almost a salute. You'll get emails today, she said, standing. I'll send a schedule. Maya will arrange pickup next week. I'm glad I came. I am too, Savannah said, and meant it in every tense at once. At the door, Lila turned back. One more thing, she said. Whatever worst story your head tells you at 3 a.m., that you're late, that you're lesser, bring it to the opening. The work makes a liar of it. When the door shut and the echo spun itself into stillness, Savannah leaned against the counter and let her breath fall all the way to the bottom of her ribs. Elijah didn't reach for her. He just stood in the warmth until the room remembered being a room, not a test. You didn't apologize once, he said. I wanted to, she said, half laughing, half crying. My mouth loves a discount. Keep it for jokes, he said, and for the first time she let herself imagine a wall with her name on a placard and didn't shrink. The phone buzzed on the sill, a small frantic insect. Service had returned like a fickle friend. 5 notifications. She ignored the first 3 and opened the 4th. From inquiries at brooksandfinchgallery.com, subject follow-up and framing stipend. Maya, efficient, with a PDF and 2 dates. The last line. We'd like to feature you on our socials this week. Please send a headshot and a 2-3 sentence bio tonight, if possible. Savannah laughed out loud. They want my face, she said, glancing at her self-portrait. That one's taken. Take a new one, Elijah said. The painter who met the room. Before she could answer, the phone vibrated again with a number she didn't recognize. She answered on reflex. Hello? Is this Savannah? A woman's voice, steady, slightly formal, though threaded with something bright. It is. This is Nora, the napkin at Magpie. I found your site, and the blue-faced woman crawled into my throat and stayed. Is it available? Savannah sat before gravity negotiated. It is, she said, thinking fast, flipping through her mental inventory to the portrait the note must mean. A woman with cerulean light under her skin, grief and ocean making a new colour. She hadn't marked it with a red dot earlier. Would you like to see it in person? I'm around the corner, Nora said. I could come by in an hour. I work with teenagers at the mental health clinic on Belmont. We need something like that on our walls. Something honest and alive. Savannah named the price. the one that had made her stomach tilt yesterday. Silence hummed for a full heartbeat. "That's fair," Nora said, quick, relieved. "I can bring a deposit in cash if that helps." "It helps," Savannah said, and after she hung up, she put both hands over her mouth and then over her heart, because both were racing. Elijah had been listening without pretending not to. "She's buying it." "She's bringing a deposit," Savannah corrected. Practical, because belief felt like standing on two chairs at once, which tells the landlord a different story than an excuse. As if conjured by the thought, there was a knock at the door. Two quick, one late. The landlord again, hat in hand, a form folded like an apology. "Just reminding," he said, eyes flicking past her into the room where dignity hung on every wall. 9 days. "We'll be on time," Elijah said, stepping forward, not aggressive, just present. The landlord's gaze ticked to the portfolio on the table, to the gallery letterhead peeking from the folder, to the bread on the counter. He looked at Savannah a half-second longer than yesterday, and something like respect unknotted his jaw. "Good," he said, tipping his hat at no one in particular, and retreated down the stairs. They cleaned again for no reason except momentum, adjusting frames no human eye would judge and straightening the stack of one-sheets as if the papers were citizens. Savannah changed, smoothed her dress, debated lipstick, and chose resolve. At the exact minute Nora had promised, the buzzer sounded. She arrived with a woman's deliberate posture and a canvas tote whose weight made meaningful shapes. She didn't touch anything at first. She stood in front of the blue-faced woman as if she'd been meaning to arrive here for years. "She looks like my mother," Nora said, voice catching. "Not literally. The way the colour holds the hurt without swallowing her. The kids I work with, they think feeling a thing will drown them. I want them to see it can float." Savannah swallowed. "That's what I hoped it would do." Nora turned. "May I?" She opened the tote and took out a bank envelope. No hesitation. She counted bills onto the table with the calm of someone paying for a necessary medicine. Elijah watched the exchange like a witness. Not a saviour, not a man called in to validate a number, just a presence that kept the room steady while the air changed temperature. He made tea and didn't interrupt the moment with hospitality. "Do you do prints?" Nora asked, tucking the receipt into her notebook. "We may need 2 for the other clinics. I'll email. And," she hesitated then, "would you come speak to our group sometime about the way you paint people honest?" Savannah's yes felt like the click of a door into a hallway she wanted to walk down. "I'd love to." When Nora left, deposit tucked, pickup scheduled after the show, Savannah held the envelope without opening it, the paper warm like a living thing. Elijah leaned against the counter, looking as if he could stand there all day. "Open it," he said, soft. She did. Numbers of the sort that paid for heat and kept a door stared up from the stack. Relief hit her so hard she had to sit. "Rent," she said, laughing through sudden wet. "And frames. And groceries that didn't used to be plants." Elijah's phone rang then, cutting across her breath. He glanced at the screen, the non-profit. He looked at her. She nodded like a quarterback to a receiver, and he answered. "This is Elijah." There was a pause filled with words she couldn't hear. His face changed the way rooms change when the light decides to be generous. "Yes," he said, then steadier. "Yes, I can start Monday. Yes, the background check is clean. Thank you. Thank you." He hung up, and for once the couch forgot to groan when he sat beside her. They stared at each other, at the envelope, at the self-portrait that refused apology, at the little stack of one-sheets that looked like permission. "We're going to make rent," she said. "I'm going to wear a lanyard," he said, and they both laughed because that was exactly the right kind of ridiculous. Her phone buzzed again. Another unknown address. Subject line, "Hold request, pigeons." Lila, or someone she'd sent the images to, asking to reserve the old man with the birds pending a visit. Savannah looked at Elijah. The room had expanded. The day had. "Grace is 5. He said, smiling like a man who'd watched a storm decide to break up. "And serendipity is 11, she answered, fingers already typing yes, hold, thank you, while the radiator sang in the register of possibility. Opening night arrived with the kind of sky that forgives every earlier storm. The gallery's glass facade held the city like a reflection it had decided to keep. Inside, white walls hummed, track lights found skin in paint, and a quiet expectancy made the air feel taut as silk. Savannah stood in a dress that honoured her body instead of arguing with it. Deep green, wrapped and knotted at the waist, the fabric skimming her hips like it knew her name. She pressed her palm flat over her ribs to steady the heartbeat that insisted she was both too late and exactly on time. Elijah adjusted a cuff of his thrifted jacket, a lanyard tucked in his pocket like a new word he was memorizing. He looked at her the way the lights looked at the paintings, present, unflinching. "Ready?" he asked. "No," she said and smiled. "Yes." Lila intercepted them with the efficient warmth of a conductor. "Your wall is singing," she said, tilting her chin toward the quartet. Pigeons, yellow coat, the seedling hands, and the self-portrait anchoring the end like a door you had to pass through to leave. "Collectors are circling. Breathe." Maya pinned a small card beside the label, featured artist Savannah Hayes. The words looked inevitable and impossible at once. The room filled by degrees. Old men in good hats, couples in careful shoes, kids in hoodies who came because art openings mean free sparkling water and the possibility of being surprised. Janine arrived in lipstick the exact shade of rebellion, catching Savannah in a rib-cracking hug before setting a bakery box on the catering table as if it were a crown. "For after," she said. "Victory sugar." Nora swept in with 2 teenagers from the clinic, both of them carrying the posture of people who hadn't learned yet that their shoulders could rest. They stood before the blue-faced woman, the one that had crawled into Nora's throat, and the taller kid said, "She looks like she's breathing underwater and winning." "That's the whole point," Savannah said quietly, and the kid nodded like someone had handed him a map. The landlord came too. Not in a suit, he didn't own one, but in a shirt that tried. He drifted along the opposite wall as if he'd made a wrong turn into who she was becoming. When he reached her paintings, he stopped walking at all, hat turning slowly in his hands, his mouth making a surprised line. He didn't speak to Savannah, but he touched the frame of the seedling hands with 2 fingers, gently, like blessing a doorpost. Introductions blurred. Savannah learned first names and last names, and the way people said I felt that in the mouth and chest and stomach, not just the eyes. Red dots began to appear, and each one felt less like a sticker and more like a small bell rung in a quiet church. Lila tapped a glass and the crowd modulated into listening. "Thank you for joining us for Portraits of Place," she said. 8 emerging voices telling truths that don't always get invited indoors. Especially, she swept a hand to Savannah's wall, this one. Savannah sees people at the exact second the pose falls away. I'm grateful to stand in front of that kind of honesty. Mild applause. Lila looked at Savannah with a little tilt that meant, your turn if you want it. Savannah felt every old story stand up, the ones that said sit down, be small, let the room talk. She overruled them. I paint the moment people stop pretending, she said, voice steady in its first sentence and then stronger. Most of my life has been pretending I wasn't allowed to ask for what the work costs. Tonight I'm practicing not apologizing. A ripple, light laughter, relieved. She gestured toward the pigeons. He told me 3 mornings of stories about love that stayed. The girl in the yellow coat dared me to look back when she looked at me. These hands hold a beginning and a history at the same time. That one. She nodded at the self-portrait, bold mouth, tired eyes, body refusing to shrink. Shut me up when I needed it. She looked at Elijah. He didn't nod. He breathed with her. Thank you for seeing people with me, she finished. I think that's how we practice grace. Grace is 5, she thought, and the room felt like it knew what she meant without the math. After, the conversations broke into smaller weather systems. A collector murmured something about acquisition that made Savannah's knees go sympathetic. Lila handled the dance with professional lightness. Maya managed invoices as if money were just another medium you could learn to move with the right brush. The landlord drifted close enough to be counted. Miss Hayes, he said, trying the new formality on like a jacket, I misjudged the square footage of your life. Savannah surprised them both by laughing. It's expanding, he nodded. Payment received, he added, almost sheepish. Early. Thank you for the 10 days, she said. He looked again at the paintings, then at Elijah. Good to see a man bring steadiness, not weight, he said, and disappeared into the hum before anyone could turn the moment into something heavier. By 9, the self-portrait had 3 dots, a waitlist forming like a tide. Nora's clinic officially purchased the blue-faced woman and 2 prints for the other sites. The old man with pigeons was on hold for someone who said the work reminded her to call her grandfather. The seedling hands went to a teacher who said he wanted his students to see that beginnings belong to older bodies too. Savannah stood briefly alone in the doorway to catch her breath. Elijah joined her, shoulder to shoulder, hands in pockets like he was guarding nothing and everything. "How's your head?" he asked. "Like a room with all the doors open," she said, and then, because truth liked momentum, "I'm terrified to like this as much as I do." "Keep liking it," he said. "Terror will learn the choreography." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small object wrapped in deli paper, the kind Janine used for midnight sandwiches. "I made you something," he said, suddenly shy. "Well, made is generous, arranged." Inside, a tiny frame no larger than her palm. Under glass, the wrinkled dollar from Magpie, Janine's mercy bill, folded into an origami heart, the crease lines neat and stubborn. In the bottom corner, he'd tucked a scrap from the crossword they'd argued with, the squares that spelled grace and serendipity in his steady hand, tiny 5 and 11 penciled beside them like a private legend. Her laugh broke into a wet sound. "You thief," she whispered. "You kept it." "I asked Janine," he said. "She said it belonged to the story." She held the frame like a relic. "It does. There's more," he added, breathless now, as if the second thing weighed more than the first. "I don't have a ring yet. I don't want to outrun our lives, but I know what I want, and I want to ask without any discounts or marketing language." Savannah's heart did a ridiculous, beautiful thing. He faced her fully, the gallery soft behind him, their wall like a witness. "Savannah Hayes," he said, "will you keep building with me? Apartments that sometimes fit and sometimes don't, mornings where art and coffee stop arguing, rooms where strangers walk in and leave carrying themselves like they just got bigger. Will you keep choosing this with me when it's tedious and when it's radiant? Will you let me be your partner, with lanyards and landlord notes and bread that needs a wet towel to come back to life?" She didn't say yes right away because the word felt too small for the door it opened. She set the little frame against her heartbeat and nodded once, twice, and then the yes arrived like a tide finding shore. "Yes," she said, and then louder because the room deserved to know. "Yes." They didn't kiss the way movies insist you should in rooms like that. They laughed and breathed and leaned their foreheads together so they could both keep looking. Lila, passing by with a corkscrew and a line of admirers, caught the drift and raised a brow that said, "Good." Maya grinned in a way that meant she'd call dibs on photographing the wedding someday, and then pretended not to eavesdrop. After the last handshake and the last sparkling water and the last "we'll be in touch," they walked out, under a sky that had decided to keep a few stars for them. The city smelled like rain, rinsed and ready. They turned away from the busier streets without discussing it, feet finding the park the way feet remember home. The bench waited in its old place, unremarkable and holy. Elijah set the tiny frame on the slat between them for a second, like planting a flag. Pigeons, a few, even at night, rustled in the dark like pocketed notes. "Tell me a new truth," he said. She thought about all the rooms that had opened that night, and all the rooms still ahead. "I thought love would make me smaller so it could fit in," she said. "It doesn't. It hands me a sledgehammer and says, 'Take down the wall.'" He exhaled, a sound that knew relief by its first name. "Mine," he said, "is that I used to want success to forgive me for failing. Now I want meaning to keep me honest when I'm tempted to speed." They sat until the cold asked politely for their attention. Before they left, Savannah took the tiny frame in both hands, kissed the glass and tucked it into her bag. She looked at Elijah, at the place where she'd chosen generosity over fear and been repaid in a currency she hadn't known was legal. "Grace is 5, she said, smiling. He reached for her hand. "And serendipity is 11. They walked home under a sky that had kept a few stars on purpose, the city still wet enough to carry every light twice, and the future opening like a door that had been waiting, patient as a portrait, for someone to stop pretending and step through.